following is from the Agency for Instructional Technology, AIT.
Completing a drawing which is based on the technique of one-point perspective, meaning all of his lateral lines, such as the road, appear to come together at a single point on the horizon. In this program, Paul will explain how to draw evenly spaced objects like his telephone poles so that they appear to recede in the distance.
You notice in this sketch the fence posts and the telephone poles follow the road back to the horizon, and as they do, each is drawn a little bit smaller till it gets back and diminishes it and we don't see size at all. This is perspective. But there's another thing that happens. The spacing between each telephone pole and the spacing between each fence post gets smaller. Now, how far away should we put each fence post and each telephone pole as they diminish back toward the horizon? There's a way of doing it, not guesswork. There's an easy way of doing it. I want to show you how now. Now let's draw some evenly spaced telephone poles in perspective, receding to a vanishing point here on the horizon. We know that the telephone poles are actually spaced evenly, but we can't draw them that way because distance does something. It tells the eye that they should be shorter, and the spaces should be shorter also. So the perspective takes care of the top line of the telephones and the bottom line of the telephone lines, but the spacing, we use another system. And that system I want to show you right now. You have your first telephone pole, or whatever it is, if it would be a fence post or whatever, you must draw that and determine the height. That's the first thing you do. Then from the bottom of that pole and the top of that pole, our lines will recede to our vanishing point on the horizon. That gives us the top line in which the posts will be placed, and it gives us the baseline. Now the next thing we want to do is find the center of whatever it is. If it's a fence post, here it's a telephone post. We find the center, and you can do this by eye. You don't need a ruler, just use your eye. And I'm going to use a straight edge here now to put a line down through the center, because that line is very important in placing the telephone poles down here. Now the next step is you must determine, after you draw the first, you must determine the spacing between the first and the second pole. So I'm guessing it, or I'm just choosing that it be here. I can move it back here, I can move it down here. But you must determine that first space. After that, it's easy. So here is your second telephone pole. Okay, now look at this. The way we find the spacing for the third one and from all those on is by this. We go up to the top of this telephone pole and we look to where the center line intersects here. See where the center line intersects? And we come down through that, and where we touch the base line, that is the place for the next telephone pole. So the next telephone pole then would be drawn from here up. If we want to keep the spacing equal, it'll be shorter. But if all these are equal, then in perspective, the spacing will diminish in this, using this system. And it's very easy. So here we have it. Now the next one, we do exactly the same thing. We take a line from the top down through the intersection of the center line to that post down to the baseline. And from that baseline is the placement, where that touches a baseline, that's the placement for the next pole. Of course, these poles should get not only smaller and the space smaller, but they should get thinner. For purposes of demonstration here, why I have them a little bit thicker so you can see them. So let's put the next one in. Following the same procedure, the top of the pole, down through the center intersection line to the base line, And when you get there, you draw down your other pole and do the same thing. See how you continue that? And this system is used regardless of what upright structure or object. You can see this in photographs because the camera lens sees this situation the same as your eye. You can see in these pictures that as repeated lines recede in the distance, they get smaller, and that the distance between the telephone poles and the fence posts or any vertical line diminishes as it moves into the distance or toward the horizon. In the illusion of depth, these spaces diminish, so we know that they're going to be less, and the height of the object is going to be less as we go off here into the horizon and to a vanishing point. Now, we had a system for doing that, and the system we showed you in the preceding sketch was a one-point perspective. Here we have a two-point perspective, but the same system applies. So if you're going to use this system on the two-point, you can use it on the one-point the same way. The only difference is you turn a corner here on a two-point, and you have two vanishing points. Now let's repeat that system as you remembered it in the one-point perspective. First, you must determine the height of the object you're starting with. In this case, it's a fence post. Set your first post as we did here. Now we're turning the corner. We have the center post. We have the second post set. We've determined the first space. That will determine all the spaces from here on. So turning the corner, we go from the top of the post down through where the center line intersects and hits the base line. Where it hits the base line, that's where our third fence post will be drawn. See, this isn't really hard at all, is it? Because you're simply repeating. After the first 2 or 3 steps, you're simply repeating the process, and you have a system. It's really easy and takes the guesswork out of sketching. And you'll use this a lot. You'll use it in drawing fences, drawing posts, drawing rows of trees. Many times you see lots of trees that are evenly spaced along a lane. And if I wished, I could turn a corner again. I'm not going to go too far on it, but I wanted to show you. Here, if I turn the corner, I come down here, I go this way, I'm going down here and turning this way. Then I would go back, and these would get larger as they come out toward me. But you can see the height, the center line is very important. You have to set the first spacing and the second post, draw a line through them, then just intersect and you go down through. Now that's not hard. Here's another simple way of determining spacing. If I have this block here, which we'll consider a structure, a house or a barn, it's a two-point perspective. Now in a perspective, if we want to find perspective center, not the mechanical center. Now mechanical center is if I would measure and this was 3 inches, 1.5 would be exact, that would be mechanical center. But perspective doesn't work that way. The perspective diminishes as it goes back. So the first half of this would be larger if it's in perspective. Now to find perspective center, we draw diagonal lines between the corners. And where they cross is perspective center. So if I like to put 2 or 3 windows in here, here is perspective center on this side here. So if I have a window there, and I've already drawn the top and the bottom lines, I will place it right over there, and that is actually perspective center of this side here. Even though this will be larger than this, it's closer to us. Now, how about placing one in the center here? To find perspective center there, we would take the division we had just made and cross it, diagonal lines, and here's perspective center of this section. Okay, we'll draw it here, and that's perspective center. Now you'll notice, of course, it's going to be a little larger because we want it to appear closer to us. So if we had a window here and a window here and a window here, They're equally divided. Now here's another one. The final panel back here, we find perspective center by the diagonal line. Sometimes you can guess and you don't have to use a straight edge, and you'll come pretty close, because these are estimates. Now I'd go right down through the center of where they cross, and that's perspective center of this second panel, and the middle one sets on the center of it. Now those three windows are spaced in perspective, even though they diminish, the space is diminished. They are in perspective. Another way this is helpful is to determine the center. If you need a center line, you cross the diagonals, and then here is the perspective center of this side. How does that help you? Well, suppose I want to put a roof on this. I can extend this. And if the roof is this high, I have the perspective center, and I have this point, and I have this point, and it's easy to draw the roof then to those points. Even though these sides will not slant exactly the same, they will slant in perspective if we go to these points. And that's very helpful, because guessing at that, your roof could lean if you don't use a system. Then you run down here, and you look at this up here and try to draw this line in perspective to it. So we found the center. It helps us in making the hip roof there, but it also helps us if we wanted to put a door in the center of that building, perspective center, not mechanical center. Then we have a system, and it's a very simple system, of finding the perspective center, to place the door and to place the windows, and that the spacing is right. That's very easy to do. You practice that.
For practice, try sketching a row of telephone poles that diminish into the horizon. On a blank sheet of paper, draw a horizon line. It need not be in the center of the page. Mark a vanishing point on that line. Draw your first telephone pole. Then draw lines from the top and bottom of the pole back to the vanishing point. Find the center of your pole and draw a line from that mark back to the vanishing point. Draw a second pole closer to the vanishing point. This determines your spacing. Make a diagonal line from the top of the first pole through the center mark on the second pole down to the base line. Where this diagonal meets the base is where you draw your third pole. Continue this process until you have them all drawn in.
Spacing objects in a drawing are very important, and I've just given you some simple solutions to them.
Using what you already know about perspective, you can determine how far apart objects need to be in order to make them appear to diminish into the distance. Paul Ringler is produced by the Agency for Instructional Technology in association with the Oklahoma Educational Television Authority.